This is the Marketing Podcast Network.
Stories influence, teach, and inspire us. But what about the storytellers who create them? Uncorking a Story profiles storytellers to uncover how their background and life experiences influence the stories they create. We learn what motivates them, their path to success, and what fuels them to keep creating. It all starts by asking one simple question: where does your story begin? Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Now here's your host, Mike Carlin.
Well, hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I'm excited to introduce you to a power duo of Ficks and Rosemary Ravinal. They are both joining me to talk about the difference, essays on loss, courage, and personal transformation. Rosemary, I'm afraid I may have mispronounced your last name, so...
Ravinal. Rosemary Ravinal.
Rosemary, it rolls off the tongue so much better than my version. So welcome both Rosemary and Carl to Uncorking a Story.
Thank you for having us,
Mike.
Yes, and that's what I love when I do duos. Yeah, everyone talks at the same time, so I have to remember to keep that in mind. Rosemary, I'm gonna pick on you first. Where does your story as an editor and author begin?
Well, in all of my career, I've been in communications and public relations, writing for other people. And it has been the last decade, perhaps, that I've just decided that enough of doing other people's bidding and making other people look good. I'm going to do my own. And slowly over the last 10 or so years, I've started to migrate away from doing the career or exercising the career that I've trained all my life to do, communications professional, and start really telling my story and capturing my stories, but in ways that I really didn't know how I would repurpose them. So following the guidance of a lot of writers and memoirists and such, I started just record them with no purpose whatsoever, to just start, doing voice memos and just jotting down notes in random places. And then at some point collecting them and putting them into something that's coherent and that makes sense. But it took a long time for me to be able to get to that discipline of doing it for myself. And so my writing journey started really back in high school. I've always written and I've always had great ability to articulate in writing, and as well as being in communications in front of camera, doing television work and so forth. But the real challenge was doing it for myself. And so my journey as it relates to the difference is that what I wrote about is my 7-year-old self leaving Cuba against my will, thankfully traveling with my parents to start a whole new life with just one suitcase among us three, leaving everything behind. It's not a totally original story. Millions of Cubans and other exiles from other countries have done the same, but my story is my own unique one. And so I had never really, really captured that. In some ways, maybe because of emotional blockage, I sort of put it aside. But as I started to scrape away sort of the rust of time, I started to really become more attuned to the details, the smells, the sounds of what I experienced at 7 years of age, leaving Cuba and coming to a totally different world. And so that I feel very proud that I was able to finally extract that from memory and put it in the pages of the book.
Yeah, I'm curious to dig into that a little bit more, but before I do, I want to turn my attention over to Carl. Carl, how about you? Where does your story as a writer and contributor to this work begin?
Well, the story begins, Mike, as a young kid. I always enjoyed reading, and I have enjoyed reading my entire life. And, Stephen King says, if you don't have the time to read, you don't have the time or the tools to write. Simple as that. And I've always been a prodigious reader, and I practiced law for 31 years, and I wrote as a lawyer, a lot of legal briefs and other things. And I enjoyed that, but that was very linear, as you can well imagine. It's very rigid. I would now and again try to spice it up. I remember I wrote a brief once, and my opening line was, I was quoting Jefferson Airplane's White Rabbit, when logic and proportion have fallen sloppy dead. And one of my partners said, you can't start a brief that way. And I said, well, why not? So I would try to have a little fun with the legal writing, but it was very linear. And then about 2 years ago, Rosemary and Achim really lit the fuse when they invited me to contribute. And off we went. And it's been a wonderful collaboration. And I've really enjoyed the non-linear, non-legal writing. So that's it in a nutshell.
If you look in all the authors, and I think I'm up to 290 something at this point in time, who I've had on this show, and if I looked at all of their backstories and prior careers to becoming, writers, so many of them were lawyers. I've interviewed, I'm in the double digits now of people who have left the field of law to pursue careers as writers and published authors. I think there's definitely something there. There's some overlap between, working in the legal profession and then having this creative, bug inside you which many people let out maybe a little bit later in life sometimes, but.
Right. And I mean, it's good training, but back to the reading for a minute, there's a lot of downtime in court. I was in court a lot, and there's a lot of downtime. I would always bring a book, whether it was a fiction or nonfiction. And while waiting for my case to be called to argue whatever motion, I would simply read. And if I have a book, I can sit anywhere and not kill time, but enjoy the time. It's on the subway or in an airport terminal. If I have a book, I'm good.
It'd be funny or ironic or maybe this is a silly joke, but if you were reading like Litigation for Dummies, in between, I think that would be kind of funny, actually. That maybe not instill confidence in your clients, but certainly that's where my head goes.
Well, it reminds me, Mike, one Christmas, my family got me a book, the lawyer's book on ethics. And when you opened it up, it was 100 blank pages.
That's funny. Rosemary, what's the backstory to this book, The Difference? What's the backstory to it?
It started as a conversation between friends. Achim Nowak, my co-editor, he's actually a brilliant man, and we have had the good fortune to collaborate on a number of things. Some storytelling events live that we do in Miami. We have been part of the same book clubs, and so we had great confidence in each other's ability to execute against an idea. But the idea was Achim's, because he was reflecting on all the people who he's coached and all the people that he's met in his growing circle of global leaders in different fields, and say, what is the common thread among them? And with that commonality comes the differences. And so he was wondering, we were just having a sort of a brainstorm conversation. What makes the difference in someone's life? What is that catalyst, event, person, moment of epiphany, whatever it is that really is a transformative event that brings that person closer to his or her truth? Because ultimately that's where we all want to go. And what sets us on the path? And then we started to say, well, let's try to find people who can actually articulate that idea. Who do we know? So we started making these lists of people who can we invite to tell stories, because we felt that it was something that really needed to be a collaboration. And in that collaboration was the richness of the content. Not his story, my story. We felt that someplace there would be room for our story, but the concept was to have an anthology of sorts and bring in different voices, but very different voices. The differences being their commonalities to find the oneness. And then we started making lists of people, and he had mine, he had his, I had mine, and comparing, well, this one's a good writer, this one. And so it wasn't all that difficult. It just started to congeal. And then suddenly we had these 8 remarkable people who said yes, and whose voices were very different ethnically, age-wise, professions. And then it came together as this wonderful bouquet of voices. The process then of starting to work with an editor and finding a publisher, we were very fortunate to have Balboa Press, which is an imprint of Hay House, accept this project. And over the last almost 2 years, it's been a labor of love to bring this together to actually then have it in an actual book. the joy of opening that box, I can imagine. I'm sure many of your guests have expressed that. Getting that first box from the publisher, opening it up, and seeing that it's there, it's tangible evidence of all that work is very gratifying.
It becomes all the more real when you have it in your hands, as I have yours in my hands right now. Carl, how did you get involved with this? It sounds like it was an invitation from Rosemary, and just talk a little bit about how your paths crossed.
I was introduced to Achim and in turn introduced to Rosemary when I pivoted out of the law in May of 21 after again 30 plus years. I was in this community, and a coach that I was working with introduced me to Achim, and again in turn to Rosemary. And I've been posting once a week on LinkedIn and Facebook. And Achim struck up a friendship. He had me on his podcast. He is a fan of my writing. And he, again, about 2 years ago, asked me if I would be willing to contribute. And I was honored to do that. And I very much looked forward to it. And it's been everything and more, the whole experience, meeting incredible contributing authors. And the feedback, Mike, has been staggering, because the stories that we write in this book are the stories of many, many people. In fact, my essay starts with, it's a series of losses, but what I say is everybody experiences loss. My losses are not unique. They are simply ones that I took and I repurposed and repackaged to move on to a new stage. I'm not trying to outloss anybody. I'm just telling a story about my losses. So that's how we got going. I again met these folks a couple of years ago, and it's been wonderful.
Yeah, I was really curious about the section in the book on loss. And I'll share. Earlier this summer, I lost my brother. Not the one Carl. Our older brother Greg passed away of cancer. So I really clued in to the essays on loss. And I'm curious, Carl, you mentioned kind of pivoting away from the law, and, kind of changing your career. What can you share about your essay in this book?
Well, again, Rosemary shared the prompt, and I began to think about this essay. And was there one seminal moment? In fact, there was not. It was really a confluence of events that began in 2014, when my then 57-year-old brother-in-law went missing in Arizona. The very same week my mother was dying and ultimately died. So these two things happened at once. And that kind of began this whole series of losses. I then lost my father-in-law, with whom I was very close. And really the tipping point was one of my partners, that a law firm partner, very, very close with this gentleman, Dan, died in his sleep one night. And that was a wake-up call. I was, in fact, 57 at the time, the same age as my brother-in-law when he went missing. And that's when I decided I need to pivot. And I was cognizant of the Dylan Thomas poem, Rage Against the Dying of the Light. I didn't want my light to be dimmed. So it was a series of losses. And I quote Denison to start my chapter, all sorrows can be born if you tell a story about them. So that's what I did. I simply told a story about these series of losses and how they led me to where I am today.
Yeah. And, certainly, very unfortunate events. And I know in your essay, you were talking about like a dual wake situation. But we go through these experiences in life, and, it's like what we take from them, what we learn from them, and how we process them that I think make, pardon the pun here, make the difference in kind of how we come through, these periods of grief. And of course, grief is not like a light switch, right? It doesn't, turn off and on, over, X amount of time. It's something that we always live with, but maybe process a little bit differently over time.
Well said.
Well, thank you. Maybe I will write something for round 2 of this book. But
we've been thinking about that.
I'm sure you have.
Yes, we've had actually people approach us to say, hey, if you're doing a part 2, we'd like to be considered. So.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit more about you, Rosemary. I know you kind of gave us some highlights of your personal journey, kind of not leaving, but pivoting from writing for other people to writing your story and capturing your story. What more can you share about that process and what actually wound up on the pages of this anthology?
Sure. Well, it was nerve-wracking to find that pivotal moment. I was looking at things that maybe happened more recently, but I hadn't really pondered going back to my childhood because I had actually sort of opaqued it out, and because it was very traumatic and many other things happened during that time when we first arrived in the United States. But the way I told my story resonated with people who had been yanked from their comfort, from that safety of their homeland. And mostly it's more of a sense of loss of identity, because being Cuban, I was born in Cuba, but I'm a U.S. citizen, and I grew up in the United States. But there is this sense of longing to reconnect with my homeland. I have not been able to return for various reasons. I hope that before I die, I will be able to return. And there is obviously there's huge political barriers to any kind of regular, sporadic, or spontaneous visitation. But there is, for me, a longing to connect with that identity that I left behind. Now, I happen to live in Miami, which is actually the center of the Cuban diaspora. But still, there is it, and this is a feeling shared by many of my contemporaries, a sense of still longing to return to the homeland in some significant way. To say, I'm here, I was born here, I belong here. And that belonging is the part that's missing. So that's the sentiment that I started to elaborate in those pages. And there's still much more to be written about it. So this is only a beginning for me. I finally broke through and started to mine that resource that's still waiting for me to tell more stories. And I want to leave that as a legacy of sorts to my family, who really haven't heard the story before.
Yeah. I think we often take for granted, people who, have lived in the United States for our entire lives, that, we take our home for granted, right? Our home country, I think, for granted. And I have talked to so many people, be they, refugees, or what have you, who just can't go home again. And just that feeling of, I consider, Plantation, Florida, my home, right? That's where I was born. Whenever I get off the plane, from Connecticut, the humidity hits me in the face and I feel I'm home again. But, I can only imagine what it feels like when, you can, and when it's just not an option right now. So, but that fuels creativity, it sounds like. I mean, that fuels, what you chose to write about. And I'm sure you bring that to life very authentically in your work.
Yes. And, one thing that is the connector among all of the contributors is that we've taken our experiences and turned them into coaching, helping others. There's a therapist, there are teachers, there's a shaman, there's myself. I do public speaking coaching. Achim is an executive coach. Carl does his work with motivation. And you can go on. Mark Silverman, the same. We have a woman boxing expert who has shown how women can box just like men and achieve that kind of dominance in a particular field. And that's what we'll do, taking what we've lived and then put it to the service of others, right? And that's where I feel that my story has resonance with many people. Let me just tell you an anecdote.
Sure.
From my story, which has actually become sort of the centerpiece of my essay. I write about going to the airport in Havana with my mother and father and going through the gauntlet of and the abuse that many people who left Cuba at that time were subjected to. We were, strip searched and such because we were betraying the revolution. This was back in 1962, and so it was a horrific departure. one of the things that happened is I had a doll that I named Rosita. My name is Rosemary. My doll's named Rosita. And Rosita was just a plastic doll that I had, and it was the only thing I really had with me of my room, of my belongings. So one of the guards there took the doll, looking for contraband inside. He grabbed it from my hands and ripped the head off, shook it upside down to see if there was anything hidden inside, and then looked inside and said, "Okay, put the head backwards," and then gave it to my father. And of course, it was all mangled and such. And well, we boarded the plane. We're thankful that we got through it and we're headed to the United States. And that this doll is in my hand. I'm saying, "Dad, what do I do with this? Can we fix her?" He couldn't get her head back on. Well, we ended up leaving it on the plane so that she could go back to the doll hospital in Cuba and be fixed. I write about it. The book comes out. A few weeks later, I get a box from Amazon on my doorstep. I open it. It's a doll.
Oh.
With a beautiful, beautiful note saying, "Your story touched me so much." And I could relate to the loss of that and what the doll symbolizes, loss of your homeland, that I had to buy you another one to take the place, or couldn't take the place of Rosita, but in sentiment, be her substitute. I don't know who it is. If anybody's listening to this podcast, please, I'd love to know who you are. And thank you for such a beautiful, generous gesture. So that is evidence that, and makes me so, so happy that I touched someone's life so much that that person felt compelled to send me a doll.
Yeah. Carl, I'm curious. Have you had an experience like that? Whether it's, from, your contribution to this anthology or just in the work you've been doing since leaving the law behind?
Very much so. And it surrounds this book. And I think the theme of this book, among others, is hope. And I'm always mindful. I love movie quotes. And there's the quote in Shawshank that hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and a good thing never dies. And I've had feedback. We've collectively had feedback, but I got feedback from a young gentleman, 23 years old, who told me he lost his father 4 years prior. And he was adrift, and he read my essay, and my essay gave him hope that he could use the loss, for lack of a better word, of his father in a more positive way. And, that blew me away. I mean, one of the reasons, and I mentioned it in my essay, the legal profession served me very well. I loved it. My oldest daughter's in law school. It's a great education. But at one point I thought, am I just moving money from one side of the ledger to the other? And as Rosemary pointed out, am I in service to the community? I mentioned when I was a boy, I was a paper boy. I delivered the morning paper. In the 50s, the United States Postal Service had a postage stamp honoring paper boys for their service to the community. So I really questioned, was I in service? So through this, we're clearly reaching people because our stories are resonating. But this young guy, a 23-year-old guy who tells me that my essay gives him hope, that's better than any courtroom victory. I can tell you that, Mike.
Yeah. The two of you have similar stories in that you chose to pivot away from something to something else. And I'm curious, how easy or difficult was that? Rosemary, I'll go to you first on that. I mean, kind of pivoting from, the world of, writing for other people to writing for yourself. What did you learn about yourself during that process?
That it's frightening, that it's being on the high wire without a net. There isn't the association with a corporation, with a company, with a title, with a business card. It's creating your own entity, being your own brand that provides guidance services to others. So not having that safety net was a significant step. It's like suddenly I'm vice president of public relations for a television network, and then I'm just Rosemary Ravinal. And that step has given me tremendous power and sort of tapping into the well that was always there, but I didn't trust it. And now I do. And that taking from my own experience is the best guidance we can give to the people we serve and help, because it comes from an authentic place. And so that lived experience has then given me, the resume to be able to provide guidance to people who want to excel in their communications. But it takes a leap of courage, particularly in the second half of life, to say, I'm going to go off on my own. This is something I've always wanted to do. I'm going to just take that leap and actually make it happen.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I, about 15 or so years ago, I went from working in a very comfortable, more corporate environment to being an independent consultant, running focus groups all over the country for clients. And, I wrote a blog post about it. We probably didn't call it blogs back then, but I wrote about it, and I called it Live Without a Net when I was referencing Van Halen's 1985 live, the title of a live video that they did. But it is scary, right? Because you are going from, hey, I'm getting paid twice a month, to I'm getting paid when my clients pay me. And so it is different, although scary and rewarding at the same time. Carl, how about you? You pivoted as well. What did you learn about yourself during your pivoting?
Well, I echo what Rosemary said. At times it is frightening. I mean, I left the comfort of a large law firm, and which is kind of a euphemism for steady and generous cash flow. And I went off, but it was a little easier in this sense, Mike. Being a lawyer was never my identity. There are a lot of lawyers. This is not a slam. It's an observation. Their entire identity is wrapped up in the title attorney. Mine never was. So it was easier to uncouple and move on. I mean, some of my partners said, you're really climbing over the wall. Inference, it's a prison wall that they've created. So I was never, and when I do my leadership training and so forth, I say my birth certificate says Carl R. Ficks Jr. Does not say attorney Carl Ficks. And if I called you, I would simply say, hey, this is Carl Ficks from Mike Carlin. I wouldn't say this is attorney Carl Ficks. It didn't mean much to me. The profession again was meaningful. The title, I could care less. So it was perhaps a little easier to uncouple, but frightening. And on a more granular level, like IT, boy, did I take the IT group for granted. And now I'm out on my own, like, oh boy, I hope the tech floor doesn't fall out from under me, trying to figure stuff out. I was offline the other day with my printer, and it took me an hour to figure that out. And boy, it would have been nice to just call the IT folks. So those little things on a day-to-day basis you do miss, but there is it's very liberating and in many ways cathartic, and very meaningful.
Yeah, and then there's that hope, right? There, you both took risks, and it turned out very well, and here you are, inspiring other people perhaps to do the same. So bravo, I say.
Thank you.
What was it like? And I think Rosemary mentioned it was about 2 years putting this anthology together. What was that process like? Kind of soliciting, first of all, soliciting essays from this diverse group of people, and then getting them to a place where they're publishable. Just talk about that journey a little bit.
Long, requiring a lot of patience, but note this is not our only endeavor. Achim and I were both running our businesses. So this was something that we needed to do sort of in stages, or in my case, it was really immersing myself in increments, as we were getting closer to having at least a first version of a manuscript. But working with the individual contributors, making sure that each one felt comfortable, that there was enough of a sense of honesty and candor in their writing, and to also coax them along to telling more, being more self-disclosure, more revealing, but still within whatever limits they wanted to maintain, of privacy. But to be able to make them as rich as possible, so that in that richness is the meaning for other people. So it was working and getting to know the contributors really intimately, because as we were developing their story and advising each one of them, there was a sense of real camaraderie, and we're in this together. And thank you for allowing me to be part of your life in this manner. So it was very bonding. These are 8 individuals, and I think Carl would agree that with whom we have now a permanent bond. We're friends for life, and that process was delightful. It was painstaking to actually deal with the words on the page. We did have a copy editor, but still getting those words to make sense. Mind you, we didn't start out with the subtitle of Essays on Loss, Courage, and Personal Transformation. We really didn't know how it was going to come together. It was a jumble. And then we started to see, hey, this story really does reflect the loss. This one does reflect acts of great courage and such. So it actually started to gel more in a year into the process. So there was a lot of improvisation, a lot of sort of making things happen based on the ingredients that were on our kitchen table, right? To make this wonderful, this meal of different voices and different points of view, different writing styles as well. So it was, to me, just an absolute adventure to see what started just as an idea that I have to be honest, I didn't really take seriously, because it seems daunting. Like, we're going to write a book? Is it going to be an anthology? And we're going to get all these people to contribute and to do it on a schedule? It seemed almost impossible, but we stuck to our plan and surrounded ourselves with the right people to advise us. And here we are. So it was not easy. I don't think anyone would ever say that writing a book, whether it be an anthology or one that's sole author, is ever easy.
Yeah, I know with writing and publishing, you need obviously creativity, but persistence and perseverance are 2 qualities. If you don't have them, you're going to find it to be a much more challenging endeavor. So embrace that persistence and perseverance. Carl, how about you? Final thoughts on this work, the difference, essays on loss, courage, and personal transformation, before I pivot to something else.
Well, it has made a difference not only in my life, but in the lives of others. And, I'll pull on Rosemary's thread, an anecdote. A few of us, Achim and Rosemary, would introduce us to others, and we read drafts. I read a draft of one of the contributing authors, and she responded and said, thank you for the care and time you took with my draft. I was so moved by it that I had to put it down for a day or two. But thank you. And then, so we had that exchange. So it really, really ran deep. It continues to. So it's been a wonderful experience.
All right. Well, one of the ways I like to get to know my guests a little bit more is through pop culture. So I'm curious, and I'm going to pick on you first, Rosemary. When you were growing up, what were some of your favorite things to watch on television?
You're putting me on the spot, because obviously, if I was 7 years old in 1962, then you sort of can do the math. The favorite things to watch on television. Goodness, 77 Sunset Strip. The Man from U.N.C.L.E. I don't know if any. Do you remember any of those? Are you old enough to?
Oh, no, I remember The Man from U.N.C.L.E. Because I've heard other guests talk about it, but
yeah. So there were these shows that I loved. I wasn't so much into cartoons, or more. I was more into the adult genre, and then I loved anything that Burt Reynolds did. Anything where he was
Smokey and the Bandit.
Yes, anything. I thought he was the best. And so it was not so much like the Barbie, the feminine culture. I really liked tough shows that showed people in action, that had resolution. So those were some of the things I enjoyed. I got into the Beatles a little bit late in my adolescence, and then I gravitated into sort of the classic folk of Joni Mitchell and of course James Taylor.
Great singer-songwriters right there.
Yes.
James Taylor was just here in Connecticut a couple nights ago.
Yeah.
I didn't get a chance to see him, but my brother did. Carl, how about you? Things that you used to like to watch on TV and listen to music-wise when you were growing up?
When I was a kid, I loved Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. because it always amazed me how Jim got, or Marlon Perkins got Jim to do all the dirty work and wrangle the animals. In high school, I was a junkie for Dallas.
Oh, yeah.
Total Dallas junkie. In law school, I was a Miami Vice junkie. That was my Friday night vice, literally, in law school. I first went to South Beach last Christmas, and I felt like I was in a Miami Vice video. It was awesome.
Crockett.
Music, yeah. Musically, huge fan of U2. And Jimmy Buffett as well. So I like the Stones, U2, Jimmy Buffett. I like country music, but I've seen U2 a number of times. I caught in law school the Joshua Tree tour in '87, and then they redid it 30 years later. So I was in DC, and then I went back with my law school friends 30 years later and saw it again. It was very cool to see the arc of their career. I mean, these global superstars.
Yeah.
Well,
we may have been separated at birth, Carl, because Jimmy Buffett and U2 are the two bands I've seen more than anybody else in my life. And I did that Joshua Tree tour about 5 or so years ago when they came through New York, and man, that was amazing. That was an amazing performance.
Yeah, I remember in 2014, my then 14-year-old daughter, I took her to a One Direction concert, which should score me points in the Father Hall of Fame because it was brutal. So in 17, I sent her a little video clip from Joshua Tree, and I said, "This is music."
100%
with that.
Are you going to Vegas for any of the shows at the Sphere?
No.
Yeah.
No, I'm not a big Vegas guy. I've been there a few times. I can't wait to get there, and within 24 hours, I can't wait to leave.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. Right there with you.
I agree.
Rosemary, if you could write a letter to your younger self, maybe it was that girl who had just had a doll's head ripped off, at the airport. What would you tell your younger self to just give her some words of encouragement? What would you say to her?
I would say to her, stop being a good girl and pleasing other people. Follow your heart. It's okay to not be obedient and to state what you want. Speak up. I stuttered a lot when I was young, a lot. And by contrast, I made a career out of speaking, but I worked very, very, very hard at overcoming the stutter. So I was very, very quiet, very silent in most of my adolescence, childhood and adolescence. And I never spoke. I always so they would say to me, look pretty, you stay in the corner and be quiet. That was the way I was raised. Be a good girl. I would say to myself, forget it. Let it rip. Just be yourself. Go out there, have fun, get dirty, do things that sort of break the status quo. That's what I would write to myself.
There you go. I love it. How about you, Carl? What would you tell a young Carl Ficks?
I would tell a young Carl Ficks to slow it down and appreciate the moment that you're in. It seemed like we were always doing one thing, putting it down, and then moving to the next thing. I knew as a practicing lawyer, you have a case, it ends, and it's like, okay, where's my next case? You don't, even whether you won or lost, you can learn from a loss or you can savor a victory. I never found time for that. So I would simply advise a younger me to slow it down. I ride my bike a lot. I run on occasion, and a sunrise, I will stop and just look at it and savor it. Because, as I share, as you well know from the loss of your brother a few months ago, my brother-in-law, I'm sure, didn't believe or think that he was going to disappear when he did. My friend Dan, when he went to bed that evening, didn't think he was going to die. So I'm just living in the moment, and I would tell my younger self to just enjoy what comes your way.
There you go. Where can people purchase the book? Where can people purchase The Difference: Essays on Loss, Courage, and Personal Transformation?
It's available on all the major online stores, Amazon, and you can also visit thedifference-book.com. And there are other options to purchase there, but predominantly Amazon. And I must say, one thing that actually has been, to me, enormously gratifying is seeing the reviews and the testimonials we were able to collect and actually publish in the book. some very prominent people have given us their seal of approval with their kind words. So that in itself to me is just like, wow, it's awesome. And it inspires me to do more.
Yeah, I certainly see, when I was looking at the book on Amazon, lots of 5-star reviews, predominantly 5-star reviews, which is wonderful. All of those, 5 stars are filled in. So that is great. Carl, if people wanted to follow you on social media, are you vocal on social? Are there places where people can follow you? Do you have a website you can share?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook. I post every Friday. I riff on my last name, and I call it the Friday Ficks. And I've been doing it for 2.5 years. This morning, I just posted. It's like my 150th in a row. And it's really, I try to give a little nugget of wisdom or inspiration to perhaps help folks get through the following week. That's it. But I have a website, carlficks.com, CARLFICKS.com.
All right. Rosemary, how about you? Do you have, are you active on social media? Do you have a website?
Very, very, very active. I really live on LinkedIn, but you can find all of my links through rosemaryravinal.com. I'm active on Facebook, on Instagram, but mostly you can find a lot of content. I post a blog weekly on my website. It's all about being a better communicator.
All right. Very good. Well, I want to thank you both for being good communicators on this episode of Uncorking a Story and stopping by Uncorking a Story and letting me uncork yours.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.